Greetings and welcome back for our latest in our series of Voices of Hispanic and Latin American Faith Freedom. I'm Charles Watson, happy to join you again and happy to be joined by three of my favorite fellows. Don't tell the other BJC fellows I said that, but yes, three of my favorite BJC fellows here. We have Reverend Aurelia Pratt, who is the lead pastor of Peace of Christ Church. We have Alyssa Aldape, Reverend Alyssa Aldape, who is the contributing correspondent for Good Faith Media. And we also have Erika Perez. And Erika, tell them again where you're from and where you're joining us from.
Yeah, so I'm a member of Iglesia Bautista Jerusalén in FAR, and I'm here in the Valley.
Here in the Valley, well, we're glad to have you. And each of them, as I said before, are former BJC Fellows or BJC Fellows alum from 2015, 2017, and 2018. So we'll definitely drop some things in our chat about BJC Fellows and want people to apply for the new fellowship when it's coming around in 2022. But ladies, I am so glad to be with you today and so glad y'all joined us and decided to say yes to the request to talk today. Just starting off the bat, when I sent the request out to you guys, I sent the email and I said, look, I don't even know how to title this. I know we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, but I also know that there is diversity inside of the Hispanic community, and there's diversity inside of whether people even want to be call themselves Hispanic, have the freedom to do so, but there are other titles in that. And so my first question to you is, how did you feel even having to answer that question or thinking about that topic in that way, how you would be identified and how we were labeling this talk? Erika, I'll go to you first on that.
Yeah, so for me, it sit well. I know, as you mentioned, is definitely our community is very dynamic in the way that they identify themselves, and it can change even by generation. So maybe our parents may say, yes, we're Hispanic, but as I've looked at it, when it comes to the third and fourth generation of Hispanic people in the United States, they may think differently and may identify themselves differently. So personally, I felt identified. We know that Hispanic people are definitely known specifically for a lineage in Spanish-speaking communities. And I personally felt that I fit right in.
Okay. How about you, AAA? For everybody, I call Alyssa AAA, so let's so everybody will know. AAA, what are you how are your feelings on it?
Yeah, so I think for me, I grew up Hispanic Baptist in Texas. Hispanic was what we used to identify the community there, and I think for me, it's a loaded word. It comes with a lot of history, and for me personally, it comes with a lot of spiritual history of what it means to be a Mexican American woman of faith. And there's a history there. And so I, trying to be, when we think about the bigger like Latin community or Latinx community in America, I try to think of the type of title that kind of encompasses all of us, but knowing that nothing is ever really going to get it right. And I think one of the things we talked about was this idea that even with trying to have a word that identifies us is still going to be wrapped in colonialism and white supremacy. And so, Hispanic is still wrapped in a colonial mindset for me of how I identify. It was a name given by a group associated with settlers. And so I think for me, Latinx is something for me that kind of encompasses a bigger identity and community.
Okay, thank you. Aurelia, how would you describe it for yourself?
Yeah, well, I resonate a lot with what Alyssa said and everything she said. And also, just coming from my own experience, I grew up in rural North Louisiana, really disconnected from anybody who looked like me. And so when I come to the conversation about labels and identity, there's a lot of personal healing and trauma to sift through. As far as what I feel like I'm allowed to own in the community, because I have like the face and I have the name, but I don't have the accent, I don't have the language, I don't necessarily have the community. And that's something that has been a journey for me, realizing that nobody can give permission except me on how I identify and what I call myself. And so on that journey, I've done a lot of learning, a lot of unlearning, and look into the labels, and it's really just something that I feel like each individual person has to do for themselves, whether they were disconnected or not. Because the thing with our community, I will say, is that everybody lives in that liminal space. And when I thought that I, didn't belong, I realized that even the people who spoke Spanish, or even the people who grew up in community, still feel like there's this feeling of not enough, which I think is a generationally inherited trauma of being in between. And so the language has so much to do with that. And so for me, I probably most often identify as Chicana, and that's just language that resonated with me when I read about it.
That's beautiful from all three of you, and it resonates with me just because when we were doing the Voices of Black Age Freedom, I often say, sometimes I will say Black with certain people, but when there are other communities in the group and we're talking in American context, I don't give America home base to anybody. So I will say European American or African American or Mexican American. I just don't give home base to anybody. So for me, it was a not giving up giving this title to everybody. If somebody's going to have a hyphen, then everybody has a hyphen. And it's beautiful to hear how each of you come to it and resonating with it, with what's connected to you, and all three of you can have that. And I love that about this conversation. And so my second question is kind of based off of that. How do you think your identity has informed your theology, and how has your identity been preconceived by others? Aurelia, you kind of talked about having maybe the look or the name that people think about. And so there's some preconceptions in that. But how do you think that has informed your theology, or that preconception has informed your theology or identity, Aurelia?
My goodness, that's a very, very complex question. I'll just say what comes to my mind first, because that's all I got. But I will say that let's go back to 2015. I don't know if we want to, but there was a presidential election going on, and there was a lot of, we already know that there's, racism and all of that. We already knew about all that, right? But like in 2015, people were talking about it a lot because of the presidential election going on, and there was a lot happening in the world. Charlottesville happened shortly after that in 2016. And it was really an eye-opening moment for me in a predominantly white context to see so many people struggle to speak out against it, to really feel like they needed to wrestle, they needed to figure out how to shift that paradigm that they'd inherited into a new paradigm that was okay, and they weren't going to burn in hell for it. And to see how faith mixed so much with that political election and experience in the like our country's, like what was going on in our country during that time. And I remember realizing when Charlottesville, so then Trump won the election. So then everyone was like, whoa. and things just kept happening one after another. And Charlottesville happened that summer after the election. And I remember thinking like, okay, there are people marching in the streets, and they've got like tiki torches, and this is very like KKK like, and this is crazy. Finally, this is it. This is the moment. Like everybody's gonna all band together and say like, this is right. White supremacy is real. This is bad. This is, and still people like found ways to not speak out or to even just humanize these people's actions, and try to find, I don't know, it was just very strange. And I felt like in that moment, it was a really eye-opening for me that this is what it feels like to live in a brown body and to have an experience. I don't have the experience of a Black man or a Black woman in America, but I have my fair share of racial traumas. And I know that they shaped the way that I looked at the politics and the way that I looked at my faith, and how for me it was never in contradiction to do the right thing, to speak against certain things, to vote against certain things. It just, I guess I would say that's a lived out way that my theology presented itself. And I don't know if that answered the question. But.
No, that's definitely a part of it. I mean, that's your theology is part of your politics.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Erika, how about you? How would you say your theology has been shaped by your identity?
Yeah, so I definitely can think back to just the way that I was brought up, and I can think about how my family has shaped the way that I see the world and how I see people. And I remember moments in time where gathering together is important, with a meal. Also, sharing time with others is important. Caring for others is important. The importance of how our grandparents play a role within our families, how women in our families play a specific role, how men in our families play a specific role. So just witnessing all of that, if I can think of all the positive traits within my community and the way that my family has definitely influenced the way that I've lived out to be, I can definitely see that those positive traits are in line with the theology of God, right? And how God calls us to be good to others. God calls us to protect people, the elderly, children. And I think experiencing that within my family and with my community has really informed what to care for and who to protect and who to connect with. So I definitely believe that in that way, specifically for Christians, has informed the way that I treat and connect with others.
I love that. I love that. AAA.
So I think for me, how it's informed my faith, again, I mentioned growing up in Texas, growing up Baptist, and the Hispanic Baptist faith was the faith that taught me that God was good and God called me good. And it was the faith that showed me that all of us were capable and called as leaders. And yet, and we can say this about any, faith community at any point, there were limitations that were always put on particular groups of people. And then also recognizing kind of the proximity to whiteness and how that played out for our faith community, and whether it was having the lighter skin or whether it was sounding white or looking a certain way, there was this need to continue with that proximity. And I think going from one world, right, where I looked like everybody else. Everyone had similar last names like me. Everyone spoke like me in San Antonio. And then going from that to predominantly white spaces where I didn't think I was different, but immediately someone saw me and my face and my body, and there was an immediate need to put me into categorize me. Where are you from? No, where are you really from? And this is all happening in faith, in these faith spaces. And so recognizing the close relationship that Christianity, that American Christianity in particular, has with whiteness, was a big eye opener and game changer for me. And going to predominantly white institutions that were grounded in a faith, and then working in predominantly white institutions. I think for me, it became, I mean, every kind of season of learning and ministry has been a season of understanding how my identity has informed my faith and what it means to evolve in that. And so for me, you know, one was that it needs to break away from whiteness. My God does not have a gender or a race, and so I cannot identify with a Christianity that says one is better than the other. And then second, you know, I think as a brown woman in predominantly white spaces, I have to remember that I'm not just a face to put on a website. I'm a voice in a body that is there to remind you that the Church of God does not call one good or one better than the other. And again, being unapologetically in this body that does not conform to, that is trying not to conform to a Western understanding or a Western Christian understanding of what it means to be a good Christian woman. And, you know, the Kat Armas, she, you know, Aurelia and I know her. She just wrote a book called Abuelita Faith, and it is essentially about embodying that Christian faith of our grandmothers. And I think for me, there is a lot of body work in that, in how the Latina, the brown woman is perceived by white spaces. And I think for me, there is a lot wrapped up in my faith and in how I move in those spaces as a Latina.
Thank you. You know, your stories are wonderful and beautiful, and in the essence that I'm learning, and I hope everybody here is learning. But as I'm learning, I can't help but think about some of the things that we are describing, and I say we because even in other faith, our other voices groups, we talk about kind of like coping mechanisms of how we cope with the certain society that we're in, and you stepping into a space and having a different last name or a different name that's different than others was something that was like, man, it makes me stand out. And I remember growing up thinking, I wish I had something that would separate me from the Watson name that I knew was given to me by, you know, what happened to me in America. So it's amazing that all of us find ways that we're like, oh man, I wish I could do that. And we're all navigating this together and trying to do the best we can with this. So I thank all of you just for just being who you are. And a part of being who you are is, you know, it ended up being that we had 3 women, those who identify women on this call here, on this Voices, but that wasn't the original way that I planned it. But then once it happened this way, I'm like, oh, I should have done this in the first place. This is exactly what is needed. And so my third question kind of goes into that. We've already talked about the identity, your identity in the community, and ethnicity from an ethnicity or race standpoint or nationality standpoint. But how does your gender play a role in your work as religious leaders? And so I've been rotating around. I'm gonna start with AAA again on this one, and then go from there.
Well, I mean, like I just talked about, I think part of evolving in my faith and part of the work of, I mean, I think for me, decolonizing my faith is not, there's not one point where you get to and say, I'm done, I'm here, I made it. And for me, the last few years, again, understanding my role post 2015, as a faith leader in predominantly white spaces, again, in the body that I have, in the, you know, in how I represent, how I identify, I think there are certain expectations put on, and there are expectations. And I think that there's a certain demeanor that women in general are expected to adhere by, and anything above that is considered spicy, angry, sassy, snarky, bossy, and then we get on into bigger 4-letter words. And I think there a a lot of that, again, is wrapped into the sexism and racism that is, again, kind of in our Christianity. And I mean, I think for me, I speak from experience in white spaces where my anger or my concern or earnestness are seen as disrespectful. But knowing that it's not, it is merely an understanding of patriarchy that is set to put people as, as inferior to others. But then I would also say that even when in our own culture, we have machismo and like the understanding of how that works within our own communities, and recognizing that it helps none of us. Patriarchy does not help any of us. And so I think it is an ongoing journey of decolonizing faith and trying to move away from the idolatry of patriarchy within the faith. And there is so much wrapped up in that. And I think for me, that has been a big piece of my personal faith journey and my journey as a faith leader in this work. I don't know
Erika?
if that answered the question.
No, that's exactly. I mean, it's from your context. And so it's from your context. There's no wrong answer in that. It's from your context. Erika, how about you?
Yeah, and as I'm sitting here just reflecting on race and gender, I'm finding myself realizing that given that I live in the community where everybody looks like me, race is not something that I think about. Unless when it comes to positional leadership or maybe traveling to a different space where you mentioned there may be more diversity. But here in the area where I live, there's very little diversity. So there's a lot of the people around me and my experiences definitely have to do with just the Hispanic community.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely one thing that kind of like pulls through a little bit more within my Hispanic community is how my gender plays a role within my community. And I definitely have found that at least within the Hispanic community of faith, or just Hispanic community in general, we know that it's male dominant, and there's a lack of inclusivity with females in those spaces of leadership. And even being a female can be a challenge in advancing in those spaces, because those systems have been made in place, or men are in leadership. So there's lack of championing of females. I've definitely been lucky enough to be championed by males as well, but I definitely think that they're not the experiences of the general Hispanic female community. And I think one of the ways that I've pushed through that threshold is by one, realizing what I can contribute to my Hispanic community in general, regardless of my gender and my race. So definitely honing into how can I contribute? What are things that are in need within my community that I can support? And what are the elements of agency within, whether it's my skills or my education, that I can funnel into my community? So instead of looking through the lens of my gender, unfortunately, I think about what is it that I can contribute, and that's where I can funnel in that power into supporting in different areas that may need my support.
Thank you. Aurelia, what do you want to add to our conversation about the gender and role and identity?
I muted myself. Well, I'll start by sharing two very common examples. One, someone asks what I do. I say I'm a pastor. Oh, are you a youth pastor? Children's music? No, just a pastor. And then the other thing, this happens everywhere, liberal, conservative, interfaith, like in every context I've ever been in, if I'm standing next to a man when I'm being introduced, they ask me if that man is my husband. It doesn't matter who it is. It's been someone who I just knew and said hi to. And I'm like, no. People just cannot fathom in their minds that you could be a leader standing on your own as a woman. Like, it's so hard for people, especially, I mean, not especially, but particularly since we're in this context and as a faith leader, people just really like, it's so hard for them to fathom it. And I think for me, it's one of the reasons why I am very passionate about expanding our pronouns when we talk about God, because I really believe that's, you know, it's literal indoctrination week after week after week. If we only ever use he, him, and father over the course of our whole lives, that affects how people see women and men and everyone in between and beyond. And to me, that's like a great starting point, is to just expand our image of God, expand in practice, because we can all say, like, intellectually, God's beyond gender. No one, most reasonable people will not disagree that God is beyond gender. But when it comes to actually practicing that in your worship songs, in your Lord's Prayer, in your liturgy, then, I mean, it hits the fan. We'll say it that way. People really get uncomfortable with that. But I just feel like that's a big part of the problem. And so when I think about gender and leadership and identity, I just think that I get angry.
Right. Rightfully so. And, you know, just hearing you, I grew up in, you know, the South, in Georgia, and had to continuously, and I am continuously learning how to break some of those thought processes. And, you know, Aurelia, hearing you talk about part of that was it being fed to me every Sunday in those pronouns from that. And so for me, all of this, what we've been talking about, has been faith freedom for all, because whether you talk about it in nationality, whether you talk about it in gender, whether you talk about it in the identity of a community, understanding the importance of each individual and each individual's identity inside a community is a part of faith freedom for all for me and BJC. But I want to actually specifically ask if there is a place, or if there is maybe the biggest threat or biggest religious liberty issue that you feel surrounding the Hispanic, Latin American, Latinx community, if there's something that really stands out to you, if there's a connection. Last week, our voices, individuals talked about some of the myths of Christianity inside of the community. What would you say stands out to you as either one of the biggest threats or myths or things that you would want to have expressed about religious freedom in your community? Erika, I'm gonna start with you on this one.
Yeah, so I think definitely our perception is our biggest threat. So like the way that we think and we see the world. And a lot of that time, it may be lack of acceptance and lack of tolerance for the simple title that you say there, freedom for all. Although it sounds like an amazing concept, right? We may find that there's a lack of acceptance where those differences come to a flow. So whether it's difference in perspectives, difference in religions, difference in identities. So I think there's definitely that resistance that can happen just by simply thinking about allowing people to be their own and to think differently than we do, believe differently than we do. So I think that's definitely like one of the biggest threats that I find, the lack of flexibility to think differently and see people different.
Gotcha. All right. Aurelia, I'll come to you next.
Well, can you say it just one more time? Just one more time. Like,
no if you could kind of describe what you think the biggest threat or the biggest religious liberty issue is inside of the Hispanic, Latin America, Latinx community, or maybe the biggest myth about religious freedom inside of the community. What do you feel you wish was different about that, the perception of faith freedom for all, or the issue, if it's immigration or if it's, women's rights inside of the reproductive rights inside of that, what would be the religious freedom issue you think you would stand out for you?
Yes.
All of those.
Yes. I really liked everything Erika said. I got so absorbed listening that I lost track of the question. But so I really agree with that. But for some reason, this is what I want to say. And I think it's just if we could move away from like some of the colonized, inherited forms of faith and embrace our ancestral connections, embrace our roots, I sense that in a lot of Christian communities, there's a disconnect there because we've been told, and you would relate to this too, right? Because we've been at some point in our lineage and in our history, we've been told that's not of God, that's not the way, and we've cut ourselves off from our story, our identity, our roots. And then I think that's actually a threat, because then we ingest this, like I said, colonized version of faith that honestly perpetuates Christian nationalism within our communities. So.
Well, there it is. AAA, what will you bring to us?
Yes to all of it. And I immediately thought of when Aurelia was speaking, I was like, there was, when speaking about the faith and spirituality of our ancestors, and immediately thinking of like a phrase my grandmother would say. It was like, "Es brujeria, mijita, don't do that." And this idea that, to embrace the faith or the spirituality of my ancestors would be to disrupt the understanding of faith that I have now, which is a faith, and I will, we talked about this a few weeks earlier, is a faith that I not inherited. Andrew Gardner would be very angry to say that I inherited this Baptist faith. It's a faith that my parents accepted when they moved here. My mother's family was Catholic, and when they moved here, they were, there was a relationship cultivated by a Baptist pastor. And when the story is told, for me, it is as if to become a Protestant Christian in America for them was to prove I'm no longer this, I'm this. And in that, there was a lot of culture that was lost because spirituality and faith is so, intertwined with our culture, with the Mexican culture, that I can't speak for all of it. But I think for me, there was something lost in losing that aspect of the Christian faith. That is not to say I don't love being a Baptist and I don't love the upbringing that I have, because obviously I do. But I think there was something lost in that. And to reclaim that, or even to learn and understand for myself, even the very identity of La Virgen de Guadalupe and what she means for our community as a woman of big and great faith, who said, I'm here for you. I'm, and I look like, she looks like me. She was presented to an Indigenous man, and it's an important piece of, it's an important piece of my faith. And I think for me, the biggest issue, again, is what Erika and what Aurelia have said, is we are not a monolith. We are not one group that thinks the same. And like, there is nothing more Baptist than that. Is this idea that we are not all the same. We are all different. We, and even within our own generations of, first generation or third or fourth generation, and we all identify and view the world differently. And I think the important piece to that is that all of us, we come from this identity, or this group of communities who have fought centuries to thrive and still be here. And I think for me, that is the biggest piece for me about understanding that we are not a monolith. That is important to know. And also that, we are a group of survivors who have been able to thrive still.
I love that. We're running up against time, but I think that's a great spot to stop. I had one more question, but I'll instead of saying that question, I'll say it like this. The question was about how would you inspire or encourage? I think anybody that watches this and see the three of you has to be inspired and encouraged by your faith, your leadership, who you are, and how you represent your community and your identity inside. I know y'all outside of this conversation, so I'm honored to be friends with you. Honored that you are part of our BJC Fellows program. And this right here, if this doesn't inspire you to want to be a BJC Fellow, I don't know what it is. It might intimidate some people because we have three women here that actually bring it every time, and the conversations are great. So apply for our Fellows program when it comes up in the fall. And I want to encourage everybody next week to join us for our next segment in this, and where we have Dr. Navarro Riviera, who is a political scientist, and he does research that's surrounding the rise of Latinos in the non-religious affiliation. He's going to answer the question, what can the religious community learn from a Latinx humanist? And that's going to be next Thursday at 1:30. I want to thank all of you again for again your time today and the excellent conversation. And it also lets me know that we need to do this some more, because some more things we need to dive deeper into. Thank y'all for joining us, and love y'all. Love you, love all.